And we are recording. And want to thank everybody as doing his monthly Io-Tahoe webinar. This is Steve Friedberg, and this month the topic is finding and maximizing the hidden value of data insights. And as mentioned, this webinar is sponsored by Io-Tahoe. Frank Ohlhorst is my guest today, and one of the joys of doing this sort of webinar on a regular basis is that you're able to bring a lot of people in who you've known for years and who you consider not only to be knowledgeable about what they're talking about, but also friends. Frank is one of them. Looking awfully spiffy there in your tuxedo, Frank, I might add. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well today, thank you, Steve.
Sounds good. As we were talking about beforehand, it might have been easier to list all the publications, not number of years in this business. He has translated that information and that experience of talking with easily thousands of vendors, where today he is the CTO of Magnum Consulting. He is also an industry analyst. And that context, that Frank, I am very pleased to welcome you here today.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve.
Certainly. So let's get started. One of the things that we've been talking about together is the definition of business insights. It's fair to say, Frank, that everybody has talked about business insights for years, but is it fair to say that we're closer than ever to truly delivering on this ability to deliver business insights?
Business insights have always been the holy grail when it comes to those that figure out what should be done in a business. Especially when you're looking for the only way to truly get business insights is to be able to analyze all the data that you have and be able to look at data as it changes. That means looking at data in motion, and that means bringing together all of these separate sources of data and wrapping some analytics around it. And to be able to do that, you have to know what those separate sources of data are. Now, technology has evolved so much over just the last few years, where we're starting to see artificial intelligence, machine learning, advanced adaptive algorithms, all working in concert with humans to be able to bring more relevance to the data.
And the importance here, as it says with the quote from QuickBooks Canada, is that there is a competitive advantage for your business. I mean, again, that in itself is, as you mentioned earlier, the holy grail.
Yes, very much so.
So the driving forces behind these insights are really threefold, but they're not all equal. At least a lot of companies will say that all of these three are not equal, that some are more equal than others.
That's an interesting perspective to put it. I mean, you know, people are in business for a particular reason, and that's usually to garner revenue. And that's even true of a nonprofit business, where it's not about profits, but it's still about revenue, because you need revenue to continue your operations. Now, getting to that point of being able to improve your revenue standing means you have to, unlock the potential of the information that is available to you. So from that point of view, you have to have this agility in your organization to be able to make decisions that are based upon factual data and not on assumptions. And when you do make assumptions, you have to make sure that those assumptions have some sort of data behind them. So you want to bring that agility to bear in such a fashion that you can enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of the decisions that are going on. And we've looked at it for years as this big data issue, where we have these big data systems where we gather across all these different sources of data and dump them into the data lake, and then we analyze them, and we hope that the technologies that we have in place can reveal, relationships between certain data points, or find some sort of concert of information that can drive action. So the idea here is to be able to make decisions as informed as best as possible. And that comes from, analyzing that data. But to analyze that data, you have to know what your data is and where it's coming from. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to mine the data, locate where the data is, and also look at the data in motion, especially if you're dealing with real-time insights like folks have to do when they're working with the supply chain or other type of analytics where, minutes and seconds can potentially count when it comes to, maximizing efficiencies or driving profits or revenue.
As you're talking, I'm thinking to myself I don't know any company that would not say this is what we want to do. But based on your talking with a number of end users, talking with a number of vendors, what percentage do you think are actually doing it? Is it 50%, 75, 25, what?
Well, if we look at it from the perspective of dividing it down into the business segments, you have certain business segments, the large enterprises, let's say the Fortune 5,000 that are all involved in this business intelligence data analytics game to a certain extent. But even they are just only beginning to leverage the ideologies of applying artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other advanced technologies to the data sets. And they're still faced with that challenge of discovering what data they even have available to them. Because, the larger an organization becomes, the more data becomes scattered about in its own silos. And, in many cases, those silos of data talk to each other or talk to applications, and people are even unaware that that's going on. So for smaller businesses, addressing this issue might be easier than larger businesses, which definitely need tools to be able to figure out where the data is moving, where it's coming from, just discovering the data. So, most businesses are moving towards this idea of, leveraging their data as best as they can. But, what we have out in the industry is a lot of talk about, doing this, but not that many tools that make it easier to do.
And it goes back to that quote that you and I were discussing beforehand from Peter Drucker, the management consultant, who said, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. So with that in mind, data analytics becomes a key element in that. And we had seen a lot of this stuff going on. Are you seeing the slide that I'm seeing?
Yes, I am. Data analytics as a key element in business.
That would be it.
That is a wonderful title. I wonder who came up with that.
I think I'm speaking with him.
Yeah. So why don't we delve into this topic a little bit further to help people better grasp where things are potentially heading, and why they might need to be prepared for the next generation of analytics and the potential changes that are coming. We've seen a lot of improvement over the last few years, and most recently we're seeing the ability, and this is thanks to the cloud and other services, to be able to do in-memory computing, which means that this computing can be done in real time. It's not something that where the data is stored away somewhere, and then overnight we have a system, an AI or whatever, look at that data. We need to be able to do this in memory as the data is moving through a system or between applications. So we've got improvements in that technology, more processing power, the ability to scale easier thanks to, cloud environments. and it allows us to deal with that data. We also have, machine learning coming on strong at this point in time. The tools and technologies behind programming systems to learn what's going on in an environment, and many of these come from the realm of AI, whether it's coding in Python or using other systems, to be able to create more intelligent machines, that machines can better identify patterns and do something with those patterns. Machines are getting a lot better at that. So that also gives rise to, looking at this data in motion, these real-time insights, which are becoming critical, especially in, businesses such as, financial areas and businesses that deal with large supply chains or even manufacturing. You kind of have to know what's happening in real time to better act upon things at the speed of business. So you need to look at that data in motion. Another thing that's, adding to that whole data in motion challenge is the rise of the Internet of Things and the industrial Internet of Things. These technologies where we have sensors or devices that are tied into the network that can do everything from, excuse me, that can do everything from monitor environmental controls to looking at the flow of physical traffic to weather. I mean, it just goes on and on what we're seeing with IoT. And then industrial IoT is tied right into, assembly line, manufacturing, operations, and elements like that. So you have all these data streams that are coming in for their own specific purposes, which might be managing that supply chain, but they're also providing valuable information that can be used to generate insight. So you have these immense amounts of data coming in from multiple sources that you kind of have to get your arms around to really kind of bring additional value to the forefront here. Now, the big question becomes, where does this data reside? How's it moving? How do you understand it better? And that means you have to discover that data. You can move us on to the next slide. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the question is, what happens with that data? Because there's a lot of that data, especially in the IoT ecosphere, if you will, that generating what information do you need, when do you need it, and in what format. So it's almost, I'm being deluged with data, I have to down.
Yeah, what the real problem becomes is something that where you're swimming in data or drowning in it. And you kind of have to get some sort of organizational control over it. So if you have all these fire hoses of data pouring in, you kind of have to understand, where those fire hoses are coming from. And that means following that data back to the source, and that means you have to be able to discover it. The other problem is that you have so much unknown data in systems today. So we have to deal with, putting some sort of mechanism around that unknown data and understanding, what the relationship of that data is to the business process.
Challenge of PII, especially, and moving on to the question of data in motion, not only the liability challenges, but also the opportunities. So let's get started with those challenges off the top if we can.
Well, looking at PII, that personal information, that privacy data, the type of data that you have to really have good control over because, in some cases is legislated and in other cases it's a big liability to a business if that data is not protected properly. So you have all these different elements that make up that personally identifiable information. You've got all these different data sources. If you look at it from the security point of view, you've got, biometrics, behavioral analytics, visual, you've got devices, you've got associations through social media and other interactions. You can identify trends. We're to the point where, cookies and browsing history and all sorts of elements like that can give that, identification to what we once thought was anonymous out there. And it's becoming a real challenge when it comes to protecting people's privacy and personal information, to really understand where all these different points of data are coming from, and the technologies that are advancing right now. Again, this is like machine learning and AI being used for evil when it comes down to it, because those systems are better able to process that PII information to really get better insights about an individual. And all of this personally identifiable information out there is lending to the creation of this digital shadow, these footprints that users are leaving across various systems. Now, in many cases, PII can be a useful tool from the business side, as long as that end user is aware of it. Take, for example, Amazon electronic sales process, where they're able to look at past history information, interact with you, and make recommendations in their e-store. You've bought this, you might be interested in this as well. They've looked at your interactions with Amazon, and they've looked at interactions of other folks that is similar. They've taken that big data approach to finding relevance to make those recommendations. So, in some cases, that is a very good thing, and it's a time saver for the consumer, because the consumer might be along the lines of, oh yeah, I do need that widget to go with the Watson for me to really be happy with whatever I'm going to do.
But Frank, if you think of all that data that's out there about us, Accenture recently put out a study saying this digital shadow for you, for me, for everybody who's listening, everybody has a digital shadow online of about 2.5 gigabytes of information. They know one heck of a lot about us, be it Amazon or any other company.
Oh yeah, what the critical notion to mention there is that digital shadow might be broken up into chunks across different sources. Now, when it's isolated like that, it's not as big of a concern, but now the technologies are coming forth where it's like, whether it's via merger and acquisition activity, where, Amazon has bought other vendors or things like that, they now have more pieces of that puzzle, and that digital shadow becomes more integrated. So it all comes down to, how do you get a good picture of this information as it moves through all stages, from both the business perspective, where it can be used as a tool either for marketing or increasing sales, but also from that security perspective, because now businesses have this liability of protecting their customers' data, and we're starting to see that with all sorts of privacy laws and legislation coming out, which we're going to get into a little bit later. But I'll throw out the horrible 4 letters that scares everybody, GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which came out of the EU. So we have to really think of this data from that point of view.
Okay, and the question is, of course, how do we track that information at all sides? Now we get into GDPR and also those 4 other letters that you're about to see coming out, CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, as well as the established regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA. And it's not just in this country, it's not just in the EU. Other countries like, as it says here, Mexico, Canada, Australia, they all have their own laws. As a matter of fact, you've got a lot of state legislatures here in the United States coming up with some version of CCP. discussed in the previous one, that can really cause a hodgepodge of rules and regulations, which companies are going to find it tougher than ever to comply with all of these different regulations. You may be in compliance over here, but how do we know that you're not in compliance over there? And that's a challenge for companies.
Yep, a perfect example is even looking at GDPR from the point of view of how Germany is handling it. You know, they have additional regulation on top of GDPR saying that data has to reside within the borders of the country of Germany. It has to be stored within those borders and accessed for German citizens, even if they're part of the EU. So I mean, you've got that additional complexity there, which makes securing the PII and privacy data associated with it that much more complex. But you cannot secure that privacy unless you know where that data is to begin with.
And so as you move forward, as you see problems with behavioral analytics, you go into that just a little bit if you could.
Well, behavioral analytics is using machine learning to classify types of behavior done by either end users or even other machines. And behavioral analytics counts on certain things being in motion and certain processes taking place. So over time, it can estimate what an expected behavior is. Now, on the security front with behavioral analytics, where it comes into play is that you can look at the behavior of a user to better secure what they're doing. In other words, you know that Bill usually only works from 9 to 5, and he usually only accesses these particular applications, and you can build this behavior around Bill of what you're expecting of Bill. When something falls out of norms, it can set off the red light saying that, oh, maybe Bill's credentials have been stolen or something is happening that we weren't expecting, and we need to look at that from a security perspective. Now, the more that we secure PII, the less effective behavioral analytics might become. So it can be a challenge in that respect. But on the flip side,
that's something of a conundrum.
Yes. But on the flip side, if we're better able to secure the PII and have confidence that we know where that information is coming from, we might be able to improve behavioral analytics because we're looking at what is validated data at that point in time and data that we know to be legitimate. So, it becomes 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Regardless of that, it's going to be a potential problem for organizations that are using behavioral analytics for a number of different reasons. And then, we look at it from the point of view of what this means in the world of compliance. Behavioral analytics is great from a security perspective, but it also can be used as a tool to look at, how you're securing that data in motion. If you know where that data is supposed to be coming from, if you know what the data sources are, and you know what the behaviors around that data is supposed to be, it becomes that much easier to make sure that you're compliant with the handling of that data. So it allows you to look at these elements to make sure that, yes, I have the proper levels of encryption. Yes, I've made sure that these end data sources or where the data is being stored are properly secured. I'm also validating that the user is who the user claims to be to an extent, so I'm injecting trust into the situation. All of these become key components of making sure that you're compliant, where you're going to reduce the liabilities that compliance and regulation brings to the business, but also get more out of the data as time goes on.
And in doing so, you actually turn the concept of tracking and data from a potential, oh, I have to do it, into a potential business advantage. I want to do it in that context.
That's very true.
So, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. I mean, as you see up here on the screen, IDC is predicting a total global data load, if you will, of 175 zettabytes. Zettabytes. And that's less than 5 years from now. I can't even fathom it. Somebody was saying if you were to take 175 zettabytes and put them on DVDs, it would stretch from here to the moon like something like 14 times over. It's an enormous amount of data, and the question is, how do we get hold of it? How do we manage it, and how do we continually do so? Which presents us with a whole bunch of liabilities and challenges before we get to the potential advantages.
That's right. That's right. You have all this data moving about. You have some of it in cold storage. You have some of it in active use. You have some of it in motion. And you have to, look at it from the point of view of, where is that data vulnerable? So let's look at it first from, the interception of data. Right now you have all this data flying about, moving between applications and storage and users and across clouds, hybrid environments. The list goes on. You've got IoT feeding data into systems. The simple fact of the matter is networks are awash with data, and not only that, they have the ability to access so much more data, especially as that data is being moved about or accessed. So this has given rise to this whole concept of these man-in-the-middle attacks, the interception of data, where people have sniffers out there looking at what's moving. So that means that the data, we have to make sure that we put some sort of encryption around it. Now, encryption adds latency, of course. And there's also other problems when it comes to, encryption technology, but we can get into that a little bit later. But the key here is that we have to be aware that, data can be recorded without your knowledge. It can be intercepted. And these are those man-in-the-middle attacks where, at some sort of connectivity point, data is being, replicated, copied, duplicated, and stolen without, the knowledge of those that are sending and receiving the data. What's getting interesting is that the sheer volume of data is beyond human comprehension and ability to capture it. So people are turning to AI-powered interception techniques that where an AI can examine the packets, look at what goes together, and reconstruct what the data is. Now, I was talking about encryption as a tool. We're coming to the point in time where quantum computing might be a reality within the next 5 to 10 years. And it's, theorized that a powerful quantum system would be able to break any encryption that we have today in a matter of minutes, if not seconds, because all of the encryption that we have today is based upon mathematical formulas. Quantum computers are wonderful at solving those. So encryption may become something that, is not a protection. Now, if we apply that back to the idea of data that can be intercepted and recorded, so let's say, someone has been recording data in motion and storing it away, even in its encrypted state. A couple of years from now, they might be able to break that encryption and get to all that data. And if there's any sort of, proprietary or classified information within that data, they'll be able to access it. So it becomes even more important not only to look at, the data in motion, but where the data is eventually stored, because, we can look at it from the point of view that quantum computing can break that encryption even in cold storage. Also,
Hey Frank, let me interrupt you just for a second here, because you talk about quantum computing, and I'm not sure. Well, I don't know enough about it. I may be the only one, but could you go into that just a little bit? What's the power? What's the potential of quantum computing? You say it could be here within 10 years.
Well, the quantum computing, without getting into a whole discussion of physics and, probability and everything else around it, IBM is a company that's really working on moving it ahead. Quantum computing, instead of using the typical ideology of a bit on or off, it uses what's called a qubit, which could exist in multiple states. What that means is that, you could have a bit, our basic element of computing. Instead of it being on or off, it could be both on or off, or it could be off, or it could be on, or it could change, or it could change just because you're looking at it. If you can wrap technology around that, idea, you create the potential to do computing tens of thousands times faster than what even
Wow.
supercomputers can do today. So that's the goal, is to get to that level of quantum computing. But the technology is still years off. I mean, I believe IBM has gotten to the point where they've been able to create like a quantum computer that has 4 active qubits in it, and they're still trying to work around it. It's a challenge in the realm of quantum physics that will be overcome eventually. It's just a few years off. And it's going to change the very nature of how, the problem-solving capabilities of computers, and could really advance what AI is capable of. So, going into that, looking at how computing power increases, we've got Moore's law out there. That means, the ability to compute, every 1.5 years doubles, just at the chip level, means that we're going to have
Yes.
reduced time to react to any threats that come up. So even traditional threats, when they have an AI behind them, powering them, we have reduced time as a human to be able to deal with those threats, which means we're going to have to rely on an AI to defend us from those threats. And being as, you have all this data traversing all these numerous systems and moving around in real time, we have to know where this data is coming from and where it's going. We have to identify the data so our friendly AI can assist us in protecting it.
I've never thought of it in terms of friendly AI and unfriendly AI, but thank you for that.
So, as we mentioned, the speed at which data moves, it's just too fast for any type of a manual process. You have to think of it like you have a building with, 10,000 doors, but you have one guard to watch all those doors. And then to top it off is that 200 of those doors you didn't even know were there. And that brings us into the whole concept of, we have to discover where those doors are, and we have to have technologies in control to look at what's coming and going through those doors. It can't be done manually. And, you have to have automated tools to discover those doors. We'll talk about trap doors and hidden doors that you as a security guard don't even know exist. So you need something to discover those. You have to be able to understand the flow of that data. Is that data coming in? Is it going out? Is that a bad actor coming in through a hidden door? Or is that a bad actor who's done something bad that's escaping through a hidden door? You have to eliminate those hidden doors, and you have to be able to monitor those actors to determine whether or not they're bad or good. You have to also understand what the payload is. Looking at it from the building with all these doors, hey, what if that bad actor's bringing a bomb into the building? You kind of want to know that. And you kind of want to know what door he can come in through. And, just him bringing that bomb in, is bad enough. At that point in time, you don't care if he can escape because you've got a much bigger problem. So you have to look at the context of, what that, actor is doing. So you have to understand what's in that payload, and this goes down to even more basic compliance issues, such as, you look at HIPAA, the healthcare regulation and all that, where you have to make sure certain elements of data, such as medical information, is not moving out into the open. You have to know the context so that you can secure it. You look at the financial market, or even credit card processing, PCI compliance. You have to make sure that credit card numbers or social security numbers or identifiable elements aren't moving in the data out in the open. If that happens, there's the potential for big fines and lawsuits. So you have to know, what that data is about. And to know that, you have to know where that data is coming from and where it's going. So you have to also be able to identify what is, personally identifiable information and what isn't personally identifiable information. You have to be able to mask out social security numbers. You have to be able to obscure credit card numbers. You have to be able to detect that type of information is moving and if it's allowed to even be moving. And that becomes the difference between what would be a hack or a legitimate business transaction.
Well, 2 points that come to mind. Number one, you're assuming that all the data is going to be in one standard format. Obviously, as we all know, it's not. You need to be able to identify as a company the data that's coming in and in which format and in which context it is. So, for example, let's say somebody's name is Washington. Well, Washington could be a name, it could be a city, it could be any number of things. A number like 215 could be an area code, or it could be the first 3 digits of your social security number. So how do you figure out what is what and where it belongs? And that's a challenge that everybody is going to have to face if they haven't already started doing so. And by the way, just one last point, GRC, of course, standing for governance, regulation, and compliance. This is the umbrella, if you will, for everything else. So the solution. It's about smart data discovery playing a role in being an insights-driven company. And Frank, I know that you and I talked about this quite a bit.
Yes. You have to deploy technology to meet these challenges. So, it comes down to being able to leverage automated tools that you can use to discover your data across the enterprise. You have to, deploy machine learning technologies to identify what is, personal information. You have to look at the relationship between the data to help derive better context, and you're going to need an AI to do that. You're going to also have to be able to classify that data, because those data classifications are going to become the critical foundation of being able to look at not only relevance, but context. You're also going to have to, build up your analytics so that you can better analyze the data, not only from the point of view for, business intelligence, but also from the point of view of security. So that means you're going to have some sort of a data catalog out there. All of this drives us into the concept of using something that's called smart data discovery. And although it's kind of a hackneyed term there, smart data discovery, the idea here is that we're going to use machine intelligence to help with the process of data discovery. This way, you're not just relying on a human looking at directories on a storage device to figure out where your data is. You have to look at automated tools that can uncover the data, look where it exists, and bring you that relevance to that data. And it's a challenge to get to that point in time at this time, because some of the tools aren't fully mature yet. So you have to look at kind of a starting point where you have to bring tools together and turn to vendors that might be able to provide these tools to be able to discover that data using artificial intelligence and machine learning to lend context to the data so that you can build these catalogs. Now, further, I guess, complicating the issues, that you have to look at it also from a streaming perspective. You know, you can go through a data store, a data lake, and very easily kind of discover all the data that's out there just by looking at what's contained. But, you know, an active data lake changes on the millisecond, you know, and that's where streaming comes into the picture. You have to look at, you know, what data is being put into that data lake, what data is coming out of that data lake. You have to determine if that data is sensitive. You have to determine if it's structured, like in a database, or semi-structured, like in a SQL system, or if it's unstructured, such as, you know, video, audio, and all of these other unstructured data types. You have to be able to look at those data streams, and you have to be able to tag whether it's personal information or not, or if it's related to some sort of compliance regulation. And that's the real key down there of being able to tag the data, learn about the data using machine intelligence to be able to uncover that PII. Timeliness is critical too, because you have to look at that data in motion as a liability that can be compromised for data theft or other ill uses. All of this leads up to an organization becoming a better steward of the information that's been entrusted to them. So the key is that, you know, consumers or customers, or however you want to classify them, are basing their relationships with an organization on that organization being a proper steward of their personal information. To date, that's been done with regulation and compliance, but we're getting into the area where businesses are starting to offer, you know, platitudes that they're protecting customer data, and it actually does mean something to the customer. Saying to them that, you know, you've entrusted us with your data, we're going to protect that data. So it actually becomes something that fits into marketing, that also reduces liabilities and ensures that you're able to be compliant with regulation. It becomes one of those everybody wins types of ideology.
Yeah, it's a business advantage. The analogy that I use, that I've used, remember this. You remember when they were now moving from the database had to be taken offline to do a backup. And then somebody came up with the idea, oh, what if we could back up while the database was still online? Remember what a huge jump that was. I think the same thing holds true here of smart streaming discovery, that the data is discovered as it's still in motion, that you don't have to wait for it to go and sit somewhere at rest before you discover exactly what you have. And that's an advantage, I believe, to companies and to the people whose data is being brought into the organization.
Yes, yes. You know, it's a good point. It means that you can react much quicker. You can react in real time, whether that reaction is something to detect malicious activity, or if it's a reaction to improve the customer experience, or if it's a reaction that, you know, fuels the supply chain. There's many, many advantages to being able to look at data in motion.
So let's start wrapping things up here. Obviously, real-time data analytics will continue to explode. If you were going to guess, if we use today as something of a baseline, what X capability?
Oh, you cut out there in your audio. I heard what X capability, and then you cut out.
What time? How much greater will we be able to do real-time data analytics? Some 24 to 36 a day.
Oh well, it depends upon the rise of computing power, and you know, as we're seeing scalability become much more easier, thanks to, you know, cloud services. We're seeing, you know, better access to resources coming. We're seeing technologies arise that can that can process data quicker. Real-time analytics is going to, it will explode. It's even hard to estimate how much it's going to grow, but you know, the thing to look at it from the point of view is that it has to grow because of these compliance challenges and the criticalness of deriving insight from real-time data. It's going to force it to grow, and it's going to grow quicker than we've thought.
Wow. Right. Yeah, you cited Moore's Law a little bit earlier, and it sounds like it's definitely headed in that direction. Mastering PII, of course,
Yep,
will be the key element.
Yep, we've
talked about that.
Yeah, we covered that ad infinitum, talking about it before. But yeah, any company that deals with any other individual or any other company is going to have to be concerned with PII.
And they're also going to have to be concerned, as again we covered it, but they're going to have to be as concerned with the plethora of regulations that are out there, be it local, be it state, be it federal, be it international. And how do I comply? And it may be that you have to assume, I don't know, perhaps the worst of every potential law incorporated into your strategy for how you're going to handle the data, so that if anybody comes to your front door and says, hi, we're the regulators, you can say, yeah, fine.
Yes, yes.
And it will be immense amounts of data. We've already talked about, you know, the digital shadow, but also the growth of data in general.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, it's exponential the way that it's growing, and you know that's why it becomes important to inject machine intelligence into the situation. So smart data discovery is something that's going to be mandatory, and you know, companies that are looking to really leverage the value of their data, they're going to look to smart streaming discovery as a methodology to make sure that they know about their data, that they're able to do the proper analytics and be able to maintain a competitive advantage.
And with that, Frank, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. If people want to reach you, if they have additional questions, do you have an email where they can hit you up? Do you have some way where they can contact you?
Sure. fohlhorst@gmail.com. Yeah. fohlhorst@gmail.com is the easiest way. I don't know if we had that on the beginning slide, but I can spell that out. It's F as in Frank, OHLHORST@gmail.com. And that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Of course, I'm out on LinkedIn, and you know, people are more than welcome to look for me on LinkedIn and send me an invite and contact me that way.
Fantastic. Frank, again, thank you very much. And folks, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Latest webinar at io-tahoe.com. And for Io-Tahoe, I'm Steve Friedberg. I hope you have yourself a good day.